I'd like to welcome Ori David, Senior Security Researcher with Akamai. Ori is here at Black Hat to share the findings on VPN post-exploitation techniques. His work is very timely, considering recent attacks against VPN zero-day vulnerabilities against Fortinet, Vanti, Cisco, and Palo Alto. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So, this is obviously an important issue right now, but explain to me sort of why you decided to focus on this for this year.
So, seeing all of the VPN compromises last year, all the vulnerabilities, pretty much every other month, a critical remote code execution vulnerability was discovered. And what we saw was that these exploits were being used for one main thing, to achieve initial access into organizations.
Okay.
And I was kind of wondering what else might be possible for attackers to do from this position.
Okay, so what is possible? What did you find?
Yeah, so I focused on what I call VPN post-exploitation, what an attacker can do after compromising the VPN. And two of the main things that we found were that, so first, identities that are used to authenticate to the VPN are going to be at risk if an attacker compromises it. So let's say that one very popular configuration would be to use Active Directory to authenticate to the VPN.
Right.
So what we were able to show is that if an attacker compromises the VPN, they will be able to in a very trivial way, compromise any credentials for Active Directory that are being used to access the VPN.
Wow, so that's bad.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. It can mean that a VPN compromise becomes immediately an entire domain compromise as well.
Why are attackers focusing on VPN 0 days? Is it just that they're finding opportunity, or is there a particular reason why they're drawn to a VPN attack?
So I think the nature of VPNs provide a great opportunity for attackers. VPNs are meant to provide access from the internet to the internal network, which is great from an IT perspective, but it can also be a very good opportunity for attackers. So this is one part of this, and I think that the second part would be that these devices really, as we saw, have not excelled with security over the years, and attackers are succeeding, so they keep doing it. And that's what I think.
What needs to happen in that space? I know, post-COVID especially, VPNs, we started relying very heavily on them and realized that there were some pretty deep security problems. Is there, do you predict that VPNs will be able to catch up, or is the industry pivoting to another technology that is maybe a little bit more secure?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, vulnerabilities will happen. We can't totally eliminate this risk. So yeah, I think that the general direction of more like zero trust network access solutions, where you don't trust your VPN, let's say, are going to be the better solution going forward. Making sure that a VPN breach doesn't become a full compromise of the network, that it is limited as much as possible.
So you're talking about identity access management, and really, is that where you think the improvements need to come?
Okay, so I'm not sure like an exact one thing or one.
Sure, but you're saying
I would say that
the
principle would be, today what we're seeing is kind of an all or nothing approach. Either you're outside the network and you can't access your critical applications that you need in order to work, or you're inside the network and you have access to everything. So I think the solution is going to be something more in the middle, where you put less trust in your VPN itself. You don't give the VPN full access to the network, because this is what attackers are taking advantage of.
Okay.
If we have a VPN where it is not really exposed to anything interesting, even if the attacker is to compromise the VPN, they don't have the possibility to achieve many other things.
Understood. Talk to me about how technical is this to pull off for an adversary? Is this a relatively mundane task for an average hacker, or is a VPN attack something that you're going to see more from like an APT group or a more sophisticated group?
Yeah, so traditionally we really have only been seeing the top tier nation state threat actors doing these type of things, but I think that my research actually shows that these types of techniques can be much more accessible to less sophisticated threat groups. The techniques that I show are trivial to implement. They are very easy. It's clicking buttons in the GUI of the product. So yeah, I believe that even though that traditionally we have seen mainly APTs using these, I think that much less sophisticated threat groups are going to be able to utilize these types of techniques as well.
Let's talk a bit more about zero trust, if we could sort of unpack this. It is and you mentioned it as sort of a concept that maybe working toward. What advice would you give these VPN providers about sort of trying to move in that direction, maybe not being able to make those changes all in one day or one quarter?
So for providers, I would say they kind of need to change how they work, because the way that VPNs work today, it's kind of up to the clients who actually use the VPN. If they misuse it and give it too much network access,
right.
It's kind of on them. But and you can't treat it from a vendor's perspective. So I think that a solution would be to make it harder to access the internal network, to kind of separate the VPN, where the VPN is not inside the internal network and has full network access, and there are...
How would that work? Can you explain to me sort of what that would look like, a VPN with less access? Because I don't understand how that would work exactly.
So, for example, there are solutions where you have two separate parts to the VPN, one which is exposed to the internet and one which sits internally in the organization. The first one allows you to communicate with the internal one. So it's like kind of a tunneling thing.
Okay.
So even if you were to compromise the external internet-facing section of the server, the only thing that you would get is access to the internal box. And then you will need to find another vulnerability to this thing as well, making it much harder. This is just an example of one thing that you can do to make it harder for attackers.
Does that add a lot of friction for the user, or is that something that can be done pretty effortlessly behind the scenes?
It can be done pretty effortlessly, yeah.
What should security teams know when they are looking at these VPN providers and they're setting up their own systems? Is there, without getting too much into branding, or what are some things that when you're shopping for a VPN solution you should be asking or looking for?
I would say
I know that was it was a bigger question than just a yes or no, but just if you could give our audience some idea that based on your research, you see the VPN landscape slightly differently. And so I just am wondering if you can provide any tips to our audience, what the pitfalls, potential challenges that you can see when you're kind of shopping around for these.
Yeah. So I would say again, going back to what I was previously saying, try to make it so that a VPN compromise doesn't translate into an entire network compromise. That the VPN is separated or allows you to separate it from the internal network in some way. Some VPNs, for example, will require service accounts with strong permissions into other resources in your networks. This is not something that I would recommend using, because at this case, if you compromise the VPN, you get the strong credentials and you can immediately pivot into the other resources. So I'm not sure if there's like a lot of the work here is going to be also on the client side. I don't think that there's one perfect VPN solution. It's kind of how you use the product yourself. You need to make sure that you don't trust your VPN too much.
That's a good way to say it. Okay, so what other findings or advice can you pull from your research that you can just sort of, what do you want the takeaway to be for the larger cybersecurity community from your work?
So I would say first, understand that threat actors are coming for your VPN. It may sound a bit dramatic, but I do believe that's the case. We're seeing them successfully targeting these devices time after time. So first, get in the mindset of understanding that this is happening. And the second thing is to try to understand the potential risks from a VPN compromise. A VPN compromise can lead to much more than access to your network. And so you need to understand what attackers are going to be able to achieve from compromising your VPN and try to act accordingly to minimize those risks.
Can you tell our audience where they can catch your briefing and where they can learn more about your work?
So my briefing was actually yesterday, so I guess they will be able to see it when it is published online.
And what's the title again?
Tunnel Vision, Exploring VPN Post-Exploitation Techniques.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for sharing your work with us. It's much appreciated.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Have a great one.
Thank you.